May the 4th be with you.
Also with you.
Nice. Nice. Well done. Today is Star Wars Day, a day when fans, nerds, theologians, and aspiring Jedi alike celebrate a galaxy far, far away. A day when a movie franchise reminds us that you can find deep spiritual wisdom even between spaceship battles and robots with anxiety issues. Now, I'll admit, my first thought when thinking about preaching on Star Wars Day was just to stand up here and use some Jedi mind tricks. You will feel inspired. You will pledge generously. You will bring me snacks. But apparently, mind control is frowned upon in Unitarian Universalist circles, which is super annoying. Something about consent or some other left-wing old republic rubbish. But if you were a person of a certain age, it's likely that you have certain memories of a time that is now long, long ago when your parents took an impressionable you to a movie theater without warning, without explanation, and without spilling the beans. I remember the car ride. I remember my parents and my big brother being excited. I remember queuing up in lines that went around the block. To this day, I have no idea how I could have been that clueless. But I was. I had no idea what I was about to do. I was excited because everyone else was excited. I remember the dark movie theater jammed full of people. I remember the sudden swell of the music, the scrolling words, the spaceships, stormtroopers, Darth Vader, lightsabers, Han Solo and Chewbacca, adventure, mystery, the Force. I was 8 years old, and my life has never been the same. It was years, decades, really, and perhaps a few too many sequels, before I started paying attention to the religious messaging that George Lucas and the other directors dribbled into the films. I mean, it was always there. I just didn't glom onto any of that until I watched those movies with my own children. Intuitively, I guess I knew that behind all of the special effects, Star Wars was telling one of the oldest stories human beings have ever told. A story about light and darkness. A story about ordinary people who choose to resist fear, to carry the light, and to believe that even when the galaxy feels very dark, there is always hope. Today, I want to explore some of the ancient spiritual traditions that these stories draw from. I want to ask your forgiveness if you are not familiar with the Star Wars saga, Cynthia. I'll do my very best to bring the rest of you along, but know that you have a lot of homework to do, Cynthia.
We'll have a Star Wars movie night.
Yeah, he's getting a little... We have a book for you somewhere. You can read from the book of Star Wars. We'll make sure you get that later. It's great homework to do, honestly, because Star Wars is iconic. But while the movies and TV shows invented much of what we now call science fantasy, what Star Wars didn't do is invent the struggle between light and darkness. Human beings have been telling stories like this in one form or another for as long as there have been stories. Star Wars is just one more chapter in an ancient conversation. Today, I want to look at three ancient traditions that wrestle with these familiar questions. What is light? What is dark? And how should we live in a tension between them? The first is Zoroastrianism. Everybody heard of Zoroaster? Yeah, I know this guy. Zoroastrianism arose about 3,000 years ago in what is now modern-day Iran. And it's often cited as one of the world's first monotheistic religions. At its heart is a cosmic struggle between the light and the dark. Zoroastrians believe that humanity as a whole is called to join this battle on the side of the light, and that to do that, we have to live out our lives according to a creed, a particular creed. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. As such things go, it's pretty solid moral advice. Zoroastrianism deeply influenced the Abrahamic traditions, especially the Christian and Muslim ideas of heaven, hell, and the end of days. But one group in particular took the idea of dualism farther and made it even sharper, much more absolute, and that is Manichaeism. Anybody heard of Manichaeism? A couple of you? A couple less? Okay, fair enough. Manichaeism was founded in the 3rd century of the Common Era, so almost 1,500 years after Zoroastrianism. Mani, the prophet, taught that the universe is split between two eternal, irreconcilable realms, spirit and matter. This world, our world, the world of flesh, was created as a prison to trap the soul. Liberation was to be found in a life of physical denial, put in service to the pursuit of spiritual knowledge. While it was effectively exterminated by the Catholic Church, it nevertheless left a deep and lasting mark on both Christian and Islamic thought, especially in the distrust of the pleasures and distractions of this material world. Okay, so that's two visions of a dualist religion, But not every dualist tradition saw the world as a battlefield. While the Zoroastrians and the Manichaeans focused on the conflict between opposing forces, one took a very different approach. That one embraced complexity and flow rather than division, but for that we have to go east. Lao Tzu lived in China around the 5th century before the Common Era, so about the time of the Buddha, Confucius, and Socrates. The collected texts of his sayings, the Tao Te Ching, have been befuddling students ever since. Part of the problem we Westerners have is that unlike the easy-to-grasp binaries of Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism, Taoism embraces paradox and balance and teaches that wholeness, peace, and understanding come not from battle, but from balance. Not in fighting opposites, but in harmonizing them. Good and evil are relative, subjective, and dependent on perspective. They are interdependent forces rather than an absolute, eternal enemy. And you see this in the classic yin-yang symbol, which shows light and dark in a flowing circle, each side containing a drop of the other. So let me summarize these three visions, right? One sees the world as a battlefield of good and evil. One sees it as a prison of corruption to be escaped. And one sees it as a flowing dance, where balance is the goal, not victory. Each path offers a different way to think about light and dark, about hope and fear. And all of them echo in one way or another through the choices we face in our own lives, just as they echo through the galaxy of Star Wars. The saga of Star Wars begins, like many ancient stories, with a simple map, good and evil, the rebels and the Empire, the Jedi versus the Sith. We're told that the Jedi, guided by principle and logic, are the guardians of peace and justice. And the Sith, these mysterious and powerful agents of oppression, these are the ones driven by fear, anger, and hate. We're told that the Force, an energy field created by all living things, one that surrounds us and penetrates us and binds the galaxy together, that is evenly divided, a light side and a dark side, locked in eternal struggle. At first, it feels very Zoroastrian, two primal powers engaged in perpetual battle. And our task as humans, or at least as protagonists in the story, is very clear. We stand with the light, reject the dark, embrace the path of the Jedi, learn the ways of the Force, and defeat the agents of Empire and the servants of the dark side. And that is pretty much the whole of the first movie series. But as the saga continues, things get complicated. The second movie series shifts back in time to Luke's father, a young Jedi named Anakin, and we're told he is the savior, prophesied to bring balance to the Force. Loyalty and belief in the rightness and goodness of their mission, their training, their understanding of the Force, this prophecy invigorates the noble Obi-Wan Kenobi and the entirety of the Jedi Order, even as it sets up Anakin and for his conversion to the Sith Lord Darth Vader and the rise of the evil empire. We're told that the reason for Anakin's fall is that he is manipulated and twisted through fear. Fear for the safety of his beloved wife. One of the Jedi teachers, Yoda, explains it this way: fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. In the films, fear, love, hate, joy, emotions and passions and attachments of any kind, these are the traps of the physical world. And as such, they are the enemies of the spirit and mind, enemies of pure reason and logic, enemies of the light side of the Force. All of our all-too-human frailties can only ever be an impediment, can only ever cloud the judgment of a good and true Jedi. And that is why the Jedi train to leave them behind. And when that training fails, as it did for Anakin, and later, years later, as it did for Luke as well, chaos, ruin, and suffering surely follow. And that is some strong, solid Manichaeism right there. But that's the second series of movies. But that's not all. We can go under the cover, go a bit deeper, and talk about Darth Vader just for a moment. We are shown that this all-powerful and irresistible master of the dark side is not quite lost to the dark. Anakin, now as Vader, lets his son rekindle a flicker of the light. That rekindling is why Vader then sacrifices himself to save his son and throw down the evil emperor. The light, hidden in the dark, not only saves them both, but also frees the entire galaxy from tyranny. Well, at least until the last movie series. But this move takes us further along the dualist path, one that started with Zoroastrianism, moved to Manichaeism, and now finally comes home in Taoism. And that's interesting, because if Lao Tzu is correct, maybe the light and dark are not fixed camps that we belong to forever. Maybe they are forces within each of us, always moving, always in tension. As a theologian, I find this fascinating. I find it more fascinating that of the three approaches to dualism, it's this last one, the messy, sticky, blended, earthy combination of light and dark. That is what gets explored in the latest movies and TV shows. This evolution is probably most clear in that recent TV series Andor, the one we talked about just a little while ago. We already heard the voice of the resistance in the idealistic manifesto of Karis Nemec. But to get a fuller sense of what I'm going at here, I want to turn to Luthen Rael, who we learn is the original architect of the rebellion against the Empire. And he is something quite a bit less than idealistic. A spy for Luthen's new resistance, fearing for his life and trying to quit before he's caught and killed, demands to know what Luthen himself has sacrificed to the cause. And Luthen responds by saying this: calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I've made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago, from which there's only one conclusion: I'm damned for what I do. my anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight. They've set me on a path from which there is no escape. I yearned to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat him. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. And the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything. So says Luthen Rail. This confession is chilling because it's so naked. He names something we don't like to face, that the fight for justice is rarely pure, and the choices we make are rarely clean. As a minister, this is what concerns me when our activists talk so passionately and hyperbolically, whispering and shouting their words of resistance and rebellion. I get nervous whenever the lines get drawn so cleanly. Because what Star Wars tells us is that these old, comfortable, and inspiring binaries, the rhetoric of light and dark, good and evil, hero and villain, has a tendency to crumble when it meets the reality of imperfect people in an imperfect world. Because that is when real people suffer. And isn't that exactly where we find ourselves right now? I mean, if we're to be good Jedi about our conversations about the day we happen to be living in, if we're aiming for a calm, clear-eyed analysis, one committed to detachment as well as discernment, we can see how binary thinking poisons so many of the challenges we face. We see it in our border debates, where we have allowed law and compassion to be cast as opposites, when in truth, justice demands both. Elevating process over people leads to inhumane outcomes. Ignoring process invites arbitrariness, abuse, and chaos. These things should never have been in conflict, but they are. We see it in Gaza, where brutal oppression by empire meets the violent response of the oppressed, and where leaders on both sides, Hamas and Israel alike, have committed to horror and atrocity, with tens of thousands of innocents paying the price. The temptation is to choose one side as righteous and the other as evil, but the truth is far messier and far more tragic. When everyone is both hero and villain, only suffering can follow. We see it in the climate crisis, where the need for urgent action is undeniable, yet deep unfairness is impossible to avoid. Poor nations are told that they are the ones that must limit growth and thereby solve the problem that was created by wealthy nations. It's unreasonable and unforgivable. It's a tension. What's unfair, though, is still true, and what's necessary is still unjust. How can we help when we are the harm? And we see it in our own nation's political life, where we have been manipulated into hardened, polarized tribes that no longer listen, no longer compromise, no longer work together for the common good. We have far more in common than we have in conflict, yet we have been told otherwise. And worse, we've chosen to believe it. In every case, the world pushes us towards simple answers, easy divisions, rigid sides. But if life and art teach us anything, it's not just that good people can face overwhelming odds and win. It's not just that oppressive regimes always end. It's not just that hope gets reborn every generation and that it is our job, each of us, to carry the light of truth, faith, and solidarity. No, not just, because there's more. What the Star Wars saga teaches us is that there is real danger not just in choosing wrongly, but in choosing blindly. The old UU fourth principle calls us to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And while we love to celebrate the freedom, our right to think, question, and seek our own paths, it's the responsibility part that truly tests us. Because it's not enough to follow your intuitions or cling to the truths you've inherited or to choose a side and just stay there forever. You are called to something harder, to discover what is real, to recognize the dark hidden in the light, and to seek out the light struggling in the dark, to hold love and truth together, even when they pull us in different directions, to be suspicious of certainty, to reject binaries wherever and whenever we find them, to question, and not just once, but constantly, as new facts emerge, as new experience is acquired, as new perspectives challenge us. Our faith reminds us that moral clarity isn't a one-time choice. It's a lifelong practice. We must choose the good, celebrate the right, lift up the light, move onward, upward, forever. That is the call. But we are also asked to be forever awake to complexity, to let love guide us, yes, but to ensure that love is wise, honest, and courageous. To ask again and again, what is love and compassion demanding of me right now? And also, what are my virtues, ideals, and values requiring of me right now? What truth am I resisting because that truth is uncomfortable or inconvenient? And how do I hold all of this at the same time? Because that is the true spiritual practice of Unitarian Universalism. Not to rise above our humanity, but to live fully into it with all of its contradictions. To keep showing up, to keep questioning, to keep learning, to keep moving, to keep growing, even when it's hard. To hold fast to our ideals, to our humanity, and to each other, even when the world is pulling us apart. Because in the end, as much as you may have longed for a world of purity and certainty and light, that's television. It's not where you live. You are human, and humans live in the gray, in the tension, in the struggle, in the yin and the yang. And it is there, right there in the messy, uncertain, earthy middle. That is where your work matters most. That is where justice is forged. That is where love is tested. That is where hope is reborn. And that is where you are called to be. Happy Star Wars Day.
Visit us at uusg.org.